One of the things that, whilst reading the Bible, even from a young age, I've always taken notice of is the numbers in the Bible 3, 7, 12, 40, 72. It's the same numbers being repeated over and over and over through both the Old and New Testaments. Why are the numbers in the Bible so significant?
There's many reasons for that. And I always point people to the work of Bonnie Gaunt, Gaunt. She is a Christian, and she's just brilliant at unpacking these meanings. But in general, if you go back, say you take a wider vision than her work and all of that, you go back to the old Hebrews, and they're not necessarily the same as the Jews, right? The Jews are a later, when you understand what the word Hebrew means, that it meant adepts of the highest. Ibaru would be their real name. But the Jews are Ibaru, but in a kind of a kindergarten way. Think of what was before them, extraordinary, mighty people. And so numbers were then used as hermetic nomenclature. So just like we've got numbers on the front of a house or a mansion, in a very similar way, the number was your badge, signifying your degree. Not just 33 or 22, but a lot of numbers like the ones you said, 367, 1221, 22. There's a lot of numbers out there, 78, 36, that signified an initiation stage, like a grade in masonry. So it was a kind of a hermetic nomenclature, recognizable when it was applied to something, to say, watch out. Like say you take a movie like the Da Vinci Code, there's even certain words and sentences in films like that actually tell the audience on a subliminal level, pay attention now. The next thing has a big exclamation mark on it, but the viewer just doesn't see it. It's just some reference about something or other, and we carry on. But the esoteric, you just heard a little thing there, or something like rang a little bell, and they can do this symbolically, or they can do it in terms of a pretty much open, blatant statement. Like the number 21 is noticed to turn up a great deal in Hollywood in general, in movies in general. This number 21 keeps appearing. Well, what is that? 3 sevens? I mean, what's going on? And 12, like you'll see it in the Nativity, not the Nativity, but in the the Last Supper and what have you. So 3 is the number of the goddess, whatever. So this is a whole other area of study of numerology and gematria. So really, again, we're talking just in general here without getting into actual details. It is nomenclature that either defines or denotes rank or even a particular cult. Certain numbers were, lunar numbers, 28, 14, 7. Others are solar numbers, 12 and 30, and other numbers, 33. Jesus lived for 33, but his mission, is to 30 years old or whatever it is. All of these are solar numbers. Then you have stellar numbers. So we are dealing with cults. And that's what a great deal of work on astrotheology, including my own work, has to really point out. You're now inevitably having to talk about the 4 or 7 great cults. The 4 are especially important. And if there's a 5th, that's the one I deal with a great deal, which is a cult of Set, which itself goes back to comets. Maybe we can talk about that later. But the 4 cults would be, the solar, the lunar, the stellar, and the Saturnian. And then if you have this 5th one, and I sort of hold that the 5th one really is the most important one, that all the other cults were under that. But, that's just a foible of my work, right? So from start to finish, the Bible and even other documents in the sacred literature, the sacerdotal works, say the Book of Enoch, you're dealing with cults. Well, all the cults didn't agree. They agreed on these points, but they didn't agree on those. And then as you change country, the cults, the complexion of the cults change. The Persian version of the solar cult is a little bit different than what you might find in Babylon. And it's a bit different than what you find in Egypt. And by the way, Turkey, Anatolia, had an entire big giant civilization that nobody wants to talk about. They had their own different versions of the cult. And so the lunar cult and the stellar cult, although you find them all over the world, they're not all the same. Some are even blends of one another. Some will be stellar, but they'll also be solar. Others will be lunar, like the Jewish. What we know as Judaism is a perfectly great example of the lunar cult. But it has admixture too, because as I said, the Jews were everywhere. The Jews were not captives. Let's just agree that they were visitors. Some of them were bondaged. but what one doesn't want to bite down too hard on that. The elites within what we call the Jews were by no means captive anywhere. These were an elite, and they got on fairly well with the elites of Babylon and Persia. So that story has to be all taken with a pinch of salt. But they were in those countries. They played a role in those countries. And some Jewish scholars have the guts, thank goodness, to start, now trying to insinuate that. And it's a good thing. It's good to hear. But even when you have a reference, say, to a Solomon or an Abraham, right, or a Terah, even a John the Baptist, but certainly a Herod, half these people they know doesn't even exist. They can find nothing. Yeah, because that's not what the point. Just like the numbers are being used as nomenclature, kings' names are often titles, not names in the first place. Saul, oh, S-A-U-L. Well, that's not Saul, S-O-L. Come on, guys. Jacob, that's not something esoteric that is what was well known in the ancient world, relating to phallic worship, because there was also a phallic cult. But as I said, all the cults, the solar, the stellar, the lunar, and the other, are phallic also. There's a phallic worship underneath the cults, going back as long as the stellar. The stellar cult's the most ancient. But almost coterminous with that cult, and probably even before it, is the cult of Priapus, the cult of the phallic. And of course, if you have the phallic, it doesn't make any sense to have phallic worship unless you've got yoni worship, the goddess. So that's ancient, So one thing, you keep pulling this thread, and next thing you know, you got a whale in the room. But kings, even back in Egypt, were not just what we think they were. They represent cults, their names. Now, the interesting thing is that other motifs appear, and you know that these cults were worldwide because the motifs appear worldwide. Say the chase of a lion that the pharaoh has seen, or of another kind of animal like a deer or a stag. The great hunt, in other words, is all over the world, from Celtic Ireland to the Far East. You get the symbol of the serpent. You get the symbol of the wilderness sojourn. Everywhere, every hero from Finn McCool in Ireland, in Nordic countries and all over the world, the great moment of the underworld cycle, where the wounded hero lies vulnerable, enters, like Mithra or whatever, enters the underworld, like Persephone goes into the realm of the lords of the underworld. That is found not in one country, but in hundreds of them. Battles between twins, battles between lands, right? The pharaoh is the lord of the two lands. That is not just found in Egypt. Or an evil twin rivals a fair twin for, the rulerships. And as I said, great desert traversals where you meet the hermit or you meet the wild man who has seeds of wisdom. These are all over the world, just like the numbers. So you can read the Bible literally, or you can also pay attention to these numbers, like, Revelations 18 and all of these. And a lot of sense can be made of it. And certainly Bonnie Gaunt would be a very good starter for people who, want to get into this, because if you talk about gematria and all, it gets too complicated. It's for advanced research, and there's other forms of that as well. I would say just get Bonnie Gaunt, because she is absolutely brilliant. She's written about 5-6 books, many of them even on the pyramid and the numbers involved in that. You wouldn't believe the work that she's done. Most extraordinary stuff, and a lot of it is based in Astro-Theology, because she takes the dimensions of the moon and the earth and the sun and relate it to, the cosmic geometry of ancient man. Those books are absolutely wonderful. So for somebody who's never heard of this before, get hold of Bonnie Gaunt's books, and then, you can move on from there.
And lastly, on the numbers, I find that everybody discusses Jesus and the 12 disciples as the sun and the zodiac. But can you talk about the astro-theology behind Jesus's 72 disciples?
Yeah, 72 is one of the most important numbers, and it stayed important right up to the time of the Medicis and the Renaissance, because it really represented each degree of the zodiac. So they broke the zodiac down. If you do it by degree, it's like this. There's a 25,920 year cycle, which is called the Platonic year or the Great Year. Then you break them down into the famous, 12 signs. Well, the 12 signs are of 30 degrees each. And it takes 2,160 years for the sun to go even through one 30-degree arc. But that means that if you divide it, you get 72 to go through 1 degree of the zodiac. And therefore, this influenced this astrotheological or astrological or astronomical fact affected the kind of hermetic philosophers in which they attributed the number 72 to the year, to man. So you have the great circle of the zodiac, but man is one little dot. That's why you have a degree. It's a little circle, 33 degrees. And so before the sun, as the sun approaches to leave a sign, it's at the 30th mark. But the sun is itself a few degrees, isn't it? So really, they said, after about 33 degrees, it has vacated that sign and moved into another. And then they went further to said, well, look, each degree of arc is 72 years. So 72 looked like the average man, age of man, and it stuck. Then 72, I believe, is one of the arcs, one of the vertices of a pentacle, a pentagram. And they saw it in geometry, 36 and 72, all these numbers that add to 9. So for convenience, 9 became the number of man as well, but they knew that inside 9 is 72 or 36. And that's the pentagram, which has long stood, again, it's a totally manifold symbol, but it also has stood for the mysteries of man. By the time you get to somebody in the Renaissance like Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, this is when they're showing man. Remember, in the famous Leonardo da Vinci also did it, but he got it from a guy called Vitruvius, who was an immense architect, a brilliant architect. You had Niccolo Pacioli. It became a standard in magic of the Renaissance. Finally, John Dee, all of these characters, it became a standard to represent man by the pentagram. It's actually kind of odd because it's really more a female symbol, but let's not bother getting into that. It just started to stand for man in a certain aspect. What aspect? Well, perfection. And by the way, your body conforms to a lot of those numbers too. So it's quite right to take those numbers and attribute it to man once you start getting into all the sacred geometry. Fibonacci would be another one who definitely believed that and elaborated upon it. But what is that man standing in the 5, like Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian man? It's the man who's called anthropos, man who's perfected, man who knows that his body's built out of exactly the same proportions as the divine universe, man who understood that he was God. This is not a heretical statement. This is a statement to celebrate the real spirit. If thou hast made me in the mirror, as the mirror of the universe, as above, so below, say the Hermetic tradition, then I can speak as God. So Adam, right? Anthropos, Adam Kadmon. We lost it. Yeah, the Dark Ages came. The Christians, they decided this was all going to be burned and thrown out. And it was resurrected by the Medicis. But again, it just entered only into a sort of a high intellectual, Pico della Mirandolas and all of that, we're grasping it. And the high brains. But for the local yokel, forget it. If there's any Adam Kadmon, it's that fella at the end of their street there in the church. And his God is Jesus. That's all the perfection you need. Oh yeah, and throw in Mother Mary and a couple of others as well. Not you. You're just good for catching the rats. Off you go, mate. Get back into the fields. Don't talk to us about anything of this high nature. But once upon a time, in some good old days in the past, this was something that was universally understood, and the mystery schools, that was the key for them.